Hi, I'm Emma from Carlijn Design. Welcome back for a new video, and today I will be showing how to use small stamps to create a Christmas background and how to make 2 cards out of this. So let's start with the background. For this I used the stamp set Penguin Party from Sunny Studio. These stamp sets are always fully packed. You can always find little stamps in these. And I will be using the candy cane to start with, and I used a medium red ink, Rockin red from Catherine Pooler. I also used a lid from a small box to which the stamp can stick to. I find this very easy to use, but you can also use a stamping block to stamp all these small images. I would not suggest a MISTI because you have to stamp a lot of times and it doesn't really matter where exactly you stamp. It can be very unstructured and unorganized, and I think it's much easier and much faster if you use a stamping block. So I start diagonally to stamp the small candy canes. You can also do it completely random, but I think for this it was easier to space out the candy canes a little bit. Then here I missed a spot of the candy cane, but I just went over it once more, but I don't think anyone will really notice that there was something going on with this candy cane in particular. Once most candy canes are stamped, I go back to the edges to stamp here and there a part of the candy cane so it looks more finished, so it looks more as pattern paper, that it doesn't really stop at the edge but it continues further as well. Then I thought it looked a little bit too plain for me, so I grabbed 2 other red inks and I stamped some smaller stamps. In this case I chose the smaller outline stars, and first I stamped the bigger one in red orange ink, Samba. It's the same way with the candy canes, it's in a completely random order. I just leave some space for the smaller stars that I will stamp with the more darker red, which is Cranberry Fizz, just to fill in all the leftover spots. I kept it very monochromatic, this background, but you can also choose other color combinations, it's completely up to you. With the stars I also go a little bit over the edge, but with these small stamps it's a little bit more difficult as well, but it gives it a little bit more finished look, I think. So then the background is done, and to make the most use of this background I cut it in 2 parts using a rectangular frame. This set is by Carlijn Design, which is a Dutch brand, and it is an A6 size format of card, so it's the European format. But at the inner side of the frame there are stitch marks, which I really like. So then we have the actual background with the stitch edges and also the outer edge part. So I first start with coloring these 2 little penguins, which are also from the same set from Sunny Studio. And I use very basic coloring with these. Where I think there's the shadow, I put the darker color and I blend it out with the lighter color. If I think there's not enough difference between the shadow side and the lighter side, I just go in with the darker marker once more, and then I blend it out again with the lighter color. If needed, I do it once more, but I think it's not really needed to have that much definition, because it's also very small stamps, not a lot of space to blend out, so I just use basic coloring for this. For the white space of the penguin I used a very light grey ink to give it at least some shadow instead of leaving it plain white. And for the black of the penguin I use my darkest grey color at this time, which is W7, although I prefer to color this in the cool grey colors. To create some dimension and shadow on this area, I go over the shadow sides with this dark color once more to have a more intense color. And here you can see the results of the very basic coloring. So let's make the first card. For this I will be using the border piece of the background that we just made, but I thought there would be a lot of white space in the center, so I decided to add some interest to the middle as well. So I took out this stencil named Candy Canes by Carlijn Design, and I start blending some medium red ink through the bigger stripes. I don't need to go all the way to the edge, as it will be covered by the border piece. This stencil is actually a slimline stencil, but it's also possible to use it on a A6 European size card. And another thing special with these stencils is that they are two stencils in one. And what I mean with that is that you start at one side of the stencil, like I did here with the medium red ink color, and halfway the stencil there is another pattern, in this case the smaller stripes. So once one part is done, you can either continue and blend ink through the second design, or what I do here is I flip the stencil 180 degrees and I line it up again with the stripes. Then I continue to blend the first color, and once that's done I can clean the stencil in between and line up the stencil again, but this time with the larger stripes at the bottom. This way I can start blending the darker ink from the top again, turn it, and when I'm halfway I can continue with the rest of the card. And another thing, where there are smaller stripes, the stencil is moving a little in between when you do a circular motion, which doesn't give that sharp edges, so now and then I put my finger on the stencil to prevent that, but honestly I'm not really that bothered by it. But if you like it more that the edges are clean, you can try to blend the ink in a linear motion instead of circular motion, but I find that sometimes a little bit more difficult. But another way is to use some pixie spray on the stencil so the ink won't go under the stencil. Once the card base and the border are done, I can start finishing this card, and for this card I will choose the penguin holding the candy cane. To let it stand out more against the background, I use this die to cut a circle out of the card base, and for this I take out my die cutting machine and place some scrap paper, then my card, fold it open, and then the die, and at last another piece of scrap paper. This way I noticed there were less marks transferring from the cutting plate to my card. Next I'm stamping the sentiment from the same set, and I'm placing the two lines below each other, so it has a similar width of the circle that I cut out. I'm using VersaFine Clear black ink, and mostly I stamp twice to give it a more intense dark color. Then I take out my trimmer and use the guidelines of the plastic to have an even border around the sentiment. Then I was thinking that the sentiment strip stood out a bit too much, so I fixed that in two ways. First, I decided to round off the corners and I dipped the edges of the sentiment in medium red ink to coordinate with the rest of the card. If you want to do this as well, be very gentle with the foam pads, like these, as you don't want to damage the ink pad with the sharp edge of the paper. So now we have all the different parts, so we can start assembling the card. First, I simply glue the frame onto the card base and put the die cutting plates on the card to have some weight on it. Next, I'm cutting strips of foam tape to put on the penguin and sentiment for some more dimension. And when placing these onto the card, I put some liquid glue on it to have some more wiggle room. Normally I would leave the inside as is, so when this card gets sent, the sender can write their personal message there, but as there's already the penguin, it kind of asks for a sentiment there as well. So I took out my stamping platform, placed the card in it and stamped a Dutch sentiment to wish a Merry Christmas. And that finishes off the first card. I love how this one turned out, with the penguin being the bridge between the front and the inside of the card. For the second card, I'm using the centerpiece of the background. There's a lot of white going on, so I decided to color the edge of the card base. To do this, I'm blending the medium red ink color. I start with a light blend at the edge. The center isn't needed as it will be hidden by the background centerpiece. And next I'm going over the card for a second time, and I'm slowly building up the color intensity that I'm looking for. I like doing this method to color coordinate well with the rest of the card, but if you want a quicker way and still use coordinating colors, you can also swipe the ink pad carefully onto the edges of the card base. If you use this method, be sure to have the refills of the ink pad as well, as this uses a lot of ink. Next I am stamping the sentiment. I took another one from the same set and did this in a similar way as the previous card, but this time I'm stamping with the darker red ink. I'm cutting off a slightly bigger border than the previous card, but I'm also rounding off the corners again, and I dipped it in the dark red color. You can see its effect here against the white paper. So now we can start assembling the card. I've also cut a circle out of vellum to put behind the penguin. This way it will stand out more against the rather busy background. And once I figured out the position I like the best, I start gluing the background onto the card base. I'm also popping up the sentiment and penguin again, and then I lay everything again on the card to know where I have to glue the circle die cut, and I'm only putting some glue on the part that will be hidden by the penguin. And then only the sentiment and penguin are left to glue onto the card. I first do the sentiment and let the penguin kind of sit on the sentiment, so it's slightly overlapping. And I noticed the foam tape here was a bit too low on the back of the image, so I took it off and moved it slightly upwards. And then I placed the penguin on the card front, and that finishes off the second card. So here are the two cards that I made using a background with small stamps. I hope you enjoyed this video and feel inspired to maybe try this out yourself. If you like it, please give a thumbs up and subscribe for more card ideas. Thanks for watching and see you next time. Bye!